Alright everyone, so today's video is going to be just a update on the current state of the race in the 2020 election. A lot has happened since I last uploaded. Of course, we had the George Floyd protests and riots engulf the country, the Black Lives Matter movement gaining traction. Also, we've had some updates in terms of coronavirus as well, with more states reopening and cases going up in the states that have reopened, which they even anticipated. But anyway, we're just going to be looking at the polls specifically and analyzing where the race stands right now if it were held today, and then I'll show you what the results of that would come out if the election were held today, June 17th, 2020. So we're going to start by looking at the states that are toss-ups, leans, or possibly competitive. We can look at the state of Nevada. I'm just going to use Wikipedia polling because RCP and other polling sites haven't been as helpful since they don't really regularly upload polls. Wikipedia will upload all sorts of polls, even if they're not the most accurate, but of course, the polls out of Wikipedia show a decently close race in Nevada. Of course, you have a few outliers like the Fox News poll. Funny enough, Fox News polls actually tend to favor Democrats despite, being a right-leaning news network. I think they kind of do that to compensate, to try to make their predictions seem less biased. But anyway, overall, if we ignore the Fox News poll and we look at the other polls, maybe ignore the poll where Trump is up ahead by 2 points, then we basically have a race where Biden is up by around 3 points in Nevada overall, 3 to 4 points. That's like the aggregate of all these polls put together. Now, again, the last poll was conducted in April, so not a lot of new stuff coming out of Nevada. A few polling agencies have decided to put Nevada as likely Democratic. Some have put it as lean, Sabados and CNN. And, of course, the others put it as toss-up. I purely think that Nevada is a toss-up. And if we look back at 2016, the race was very, very close. And you could say, well, Trump only got 45%. That's not really close. Hillary Clinton just did worse here. But again, you have to keep in mind that from all the polling data we have right now, Joe Biden is actually doing worse among Hispanic voters than Hillary Clinton did back in 2016, which could indicate a slight shift to the right for the Latino electorate overall. I'm not saying that Republicans are going to win the Hispanic vote in 2020. That would be very arrogant. But rather that they're going to improve, rather than getting, say, like 28 or 32%, they might get 35%, 33%, somewhere in that range. I believe the national exit polls had the Hispanic vote going to Trump 28% and Hillary getting 66 or something. So this time it looks like Trump will get in the low to mid 30s of the Hispanic vote, which in a lot of the Southwest could be enough to swing the states or at least make them very, very close. Now, again, if we look at Nevada, this is only a 2.4 percentage point difference. If we look at some of the other races, though, again, Nevada has a lot of third parties. Not as much as New Mexico and Colorado, but there is a significant share of the vote that goes to third parties. So it's very common for neither candidate to get over 50% of the vote. But anyway, if we go back to the trends from 2012 in Nevada, every single county trended Republican in the state. It's one of the few states, minus maybe in the Rust Belt, where this has occurred. So every single county has trended more to the right, and I think that trend is probably going to continue. But this doesn't mean Biden is going to lose the state, or it doesn't mean Trump's going to win the state. This just means that some of the counties have trended more Republican than they were in 2012. That could easily swing back. It could easily not. But then again, Nevada, demographically speaking, has a very large Latino population, and if it's true, and if this bears out on election day, that Biden is doing worse among Hispanics, you're going to see those results reverberate in the state, which could give Trump an advantage by a few points. But anyway, they have Nevada as likely or lean. I would put Nevada as lean as well, but we're going to look at the exit polls, toss-up I mean. But we're going to look at the exit polls out of Nevada right now. Of course, if we go to age groups, the only age groups that Donald Trump was able to win were 50 to 64, which he won by 14 points, and he won 40 to 49 by 9 points. But again, if we look at race, the Latino vote in Nevada was basically around the same as it was in the rest of the country. Trump gets around 29% of the Latino vote. Hillary Clinton gets 60. Of course, there were a lot of third parties that also went away from Trump and Hillary. If there were only two choices on the ballot, you'd probably see something more like maybe 64 to 31 or 32 or something like that. But the Asian vote in Nevada, much more conservative than in the rest of the country, 62 to 36. Other races nearly tied. I don't really know what they consider to be other races here, but anyway, in that category, that is pretty interesting. But of course, like most states, the white vote went overwhelmingly to Trump by 18 points here. And, race and gender, again, white men 60 to 34, white women 52 to 34, Latino men 57 to 30, Latino women 63-29. So if Trump is able to improve his margins among Latino voters, that could really make the state of Nevada very close, if not very slightly, give him enough of an advantage in the state to actually be able to flip it. But again, that is a stretch, but that's just what the polling in Nevada has right now. If we look at Arizona, the aggregate polling right now has Biden up by around 3 points, or 3.3, if you want to average those two together. The latest poll, I don't really know much about this polling source, but I know that Change Research is a fairly reliable polling site. They have Biden winning by around 1 point here in Nevada, Trump at 44. Basically, showing us what we already know to be that Arizona is going to be probably down to the wire this time around. I used to think that Arizona would be a little bit broader of a margin this time around, but now I've obviously changed my mind on that given the evidence that Biden is doing very well in the polling here. I think whoever wins the state, it's going to be within a point or two. I still have Trump as the favorite to win the state, but by around a point. If we look back, of course, at 2016, Hillary Clinton got just 44.6% of the vote to Trump's 48.1%. Again, a lot of the votes also went to third party, 4.1% for Gary Johnson, 1.3% for Jill Stein, and around 2% for the other people. But if we look at the trends from 2012, they show us that Arizona overall has kind of been a mixed bag in terms of trends, but the most populous counties have swung much more to the left, while the rural counties have swung more to the right. If we look at the exit polls here in the state of Arizona, in terms of male to female, Trump gets 53 to 40, Hillary Clinton gets 49 to 45. If we look at race, 75% of the electorate was white in Arizona, 54 to 40. So this is actually a smaller margin of the white vote going to Trump than in the state of Nevada, another southwestern state. Trump also did better among Arizona Latinos, 61% for Hillary, 31% for Trump. He only got 29% in Nevada. And, of course, race and gender, all these other categories. Party ID, basically the same. But, of course, this is what really matters here in Arizona. I should have highlighted it more in Nevada. But the independent vote swung to Donald Trump by roughly the same margin he won the state, around 3 points. Donald Trump won Arizona by around 3.5, I think. So this is the electorate that really matters here, because if we look at the share of Democrats and Republicans, Republicans make up a slightly higher share of the electorate, but at the end of the day, independents seem to have decided this election, given roughly the same margin as Trump actually won the state. So independents, of course, making up by far the largest group of voters in the state at 40%. They're going to be the group that Donald Trump needs to win. But anyway, as of right now, it looks like Arizona is lean Biden. Again, that's not my final prediction. I'm just saying, based on the polling, this is a lean margin here. If we look at, I guess we'll look at Colorado briefly. Polling agencies are all over with this state. Niskanen, of course, has it as safe Democrat. This is a corporate Democratic think tank, by the way. I think they're right-wing economically, but socially liberal. And they're also advocates of environmentalism, something like that. But basically, these polls from Niskanen are always skewed in favor of the Democrats by, in some cases, a ridiculous amount. So I never consider anything they say. Likewise, Mason-Dixon, Rasmussen are polls that are skewed wildly for Republicans that I don't really take seriously. But the lean Democratic or likely Democratic ratings seem pretty appropriate for the state of Colorado this time around. The latest polling we have is from May, but it looks like Biden has a super commanding lead over Trump. This definitely looks like a state, as of right now, that is out of reach for Trump, and he shouldn't really spend too much time campaigning here. If we look back at the results from 2016, Donald Trump lost the state by 4.9 percentage points. So this was a state that was a fairly large margin of defeat, I guess, for a swing state, 5 points, just about. If we look at the trends in Colorado, again, similar trends to what we're seeing in the rest of the Southwest. The urban areas are becoming more Democratic. The rural areas becoming more conservative. Pueblo County, interestingly enough, kind of is not really a bellwether, but is sort of an indicator. If a Republican can win Pueblo, it's usually a good sign. Trump actually did win Pueblo, but it was not nearly enough to win the state. But again, the third-party vote was a huge factor in Colorado and probably hurt both candidates' margins here. We can look at exit polls out of Colorado to take a look at the electorate there. These bear out much closer results than the other southwestern states. Trump at 49% of the male vote to Hillary Clinton's 41. Females, this of course is a huge margin, 55 to 39, not even close. That's a 15-point margin in favor of Hillary Clinton. Colorado, not surprisingly, is a more liberal state than states like Nevada and Arizona. If we go down to race, Donald Trump barely won the white vote, 47 to 45. So this is one of those states, and as we're going to look in a second, like New Mexico, where the white vote is not nearly as conservative as it needs to be for a Republican to actually win this state, at least in terms of the 2016 election. If we look at white men, of course, 50 to 38, that's a pretty good lead for Trump, but it could be much, much wider. Hillary Clinton has a very commanding lead among white women, 50 to 44. So ultimately, again, if we go to party ID, independents make up by far the largest share, although Democrats also make up around a third of the electorate. Republicans make up the smallest share at 24%. More Democrats voted for Trump than Republicans for Hillary, but still it's not nearly enough. And again, interestingly enough, Trump actually won independents in Colorado, but Colorado has such a large percentage of Democratic voters that it almost didn't really matter. And if we look at all of the other exit polls, by income, Hillary Clinton wins all the categories. By age, Hillary Clinton wins all the categories. So this is definitely going to be a state that is certainly leans Democrat, if not likely. But Colorado's not a state that either candidate should pay too much attention to. If we go, I guess we'll do Mexico. If we look at New Mexico here, again, not too much to talk about. Most polling agencies have this as safe or likely Democratic. We only have 3 polls coming out of New Mexico. The most recent one has Joe Biden up ahead by quite a lot. Now, the reason why I pull up New Mexico is because I think there's a lot that's being missed in the state of New Mexico, and that's the fact that Biden is doing worse among Hispanic voters, which could possibly increase the vote share that Trump gets in the 2020 election. We could see a New Mexico that is closer than it was last time. Last time it was 8 points. We can look at it. The margin was 8.3 percentage points last time. We could certainly see a race where it's only 6 points or even 5 points. And that sounds far-fetched now, but think about it. Joe Biden is not really going to campaign in the state of New Mexico anyway. Donald Trump really only has to do like 1 or 2 rallies here, or at least pay somewhat attention to it. And he can actually do fairly well here. Saying he would win it is a very, very big stretch. But again, Trump's polling nationally is not really too well. So anywhere he can make inroads, he should be making inroads. Even in a state as unlikely to win as New Mexico. But again, the third-party vote took up a colossal share here, like 12, 13% or something, more like 12%. But that's still a massive percentage for third parties, just period, across the board. There were some states that Ross Perot got around 12% in 92 and 96. So this is a state, again, that's mostly due to the fact that Gary Johnson was a former Republican governor and native of the state, so he was very well known to begin with. But if we look at the New Mexico exit polls, thankfully CNN has them. Male voters, 44 to 42 for Trump. That's, it keeps getting, as we go into the more bluer states, Trump does worse with male voters. Female voters, 54 to 36. Among all age brackets, Hillary Clinton dominated, except with the 50 to 64 range, which was a tie. Among the age brackets over here, though, Hillary Clinton did dominate by race. Trump only won the white vote by 5 points. Again, that's a miserable showing for a Republican. Again, look at this. Latinos make up 40% of the electorate here. They make up a very, very large plurality of the state, and I believe they're on track to become a majority in the state, rather, in a few years, if they're not already. It depends what demographic site you look at. Some have Hispanics as over 50% in New Mexico, some have it as 49. I believe Data USA has it at 49, but anyway, white voters are still the largest share, but not nearly conservative enough to make a dent in the Democrats' lead. So overall, New Mexico is a state I wouldn't completely ignore, but again, it's not really going to be the most exciting state either. Democrats make up the largest share of the electorate here, even though independents were swayed by Trump by a fairly large margin. It didn't really matter too much. Again, the reason why 15% of conservatives went with Hillary Clinton is because there are a lot of Hispanic Democrats who identify as conservative, even though they might not know exactly what the term is, or they consider themselves conservative Democrats, and thus still voted for Hillary Clinton. Nonetheless, Donald Trump did fairly well among self-described conservative 75%. But anyway, the state of New Mexico, not too much happening here. Joe Jorgensen will probably take up like 5% of the vote and probably hinder Trump more than Biden, but it could still be a little bit interesting. Texas is another state we're going to look at. The polling averages here has Donald Trump up by 1.5. A bit concerning for a Republican, but then again, the state of Texas has gotten a lot of attention, and also some of these polls could be skewed to try to get the Trump campaign to use up resources in a state that they actually don't have to, and it's actually a very smart political strategy when you think about it. But the latest poll out of Texas has Donald Trump and Joe Biden tied, but again, this is a poll from the Texas Democrats, so I don't really know how reliable it is. Most of the polls, though, overall have Donald Trump leading by anywhere from 14 points. I'd throw that one out. That seems a little bit of an outlier. Anywhere from 14 points to just 1 point. So the polls are all over the place, and some polls even have Biden up by 1 or 2 or 3. So Texas seems like a bit of a wild state here in the polling, but most polling agencies have this state as leans Republican or likely. I personally think at the end of the day this is going to be a likely state, which would go to Trump anywhere from 5 to 9 points. I don't really see it being all that much closer. If we look at Texas in the 2016 election, Donald Trump won it by just 9 points, the smallest margin a Republican has won the state since 1996. So, again, sort of a bad showing for a Republican here, but not terrible. It could have been much worse with the third-party influence. But ultimately, again, some of the Gary Johnson vote, or maybe a majority of it, would have probably went to Trump anyway. So maybe this time around with a smaller percentage of the third-party vote, Trump can actually do really well here in the state of Texas. Again, the population centers like Houston, Dallas, Austin, Fort Worth, San Antonio, these are all areas that have trended more Democratic, and we can see that play out here in the trends. Again, these counties could trend back to the Republicans, although it wouldn't be by a lot either way. Harris County can tend to be really close sometimes, but presidentially it is a much more bluer county this time around. But we'll have to see ultimately. But right now, of course, I would give the advantage to Donald Trump. Looking at the Texas exit polls, we can see that Donald Trump dominated among male voters, 57 to 37, a 20-point lead. Female voters, 49 to 47, not a bad showing. Among age brackets, Hillary Clinton did very, very well among 18 to 24, 58 to 32. 25 to 29, 51 to 41. But then once we get into the 30s, 30 to 39, it's tied. And then from there on, it gets more and more conservative. In terms of race, white voters, 69% for Trump, 26% for Clinton. Non-white voters, 66% for Clinton, 29% for Trump. Latino voters, again, this is interesting because Latino voters in Texas are much more conservative than the nationwide vote. 34% for Trump, 61% for Hillary Clinton. And, of course, the white vote, 69 to 26. If we look at party ID, Republicans still make up the majority, the plurality, of people registered in the state. 88% voted for Trump, but 9% voted for Hillary. Democrats, only 5% voted for Trump. So that's really interesting. However, Trump did really well among independents, 52 to 38. So ultimately, I think Texas is a state that you're going to hear a lot of noise about, but then as election day comes closer, I really don't see it being all that close. If we look at the state of Minnesota, this is another state that I think should get more attention, especially with the racial and political unrest in the state. The latest poll, again, this is Mason-Dixon, so I take this with a grain of salt, but 49 to 44. I could see that being a poll out of Minnesota, honestly, but again, Mason-Dixon's not really a reliable polling agency, and there's not really a lot of polling out of Minnesota, period, which is interesting because in 2016, as we're going to see, it was only a difference of 1.5 percentage points in favor of Hillary Clinton. But most polling agencies have this as a lean Democrat. I would actually put it as a toss-up, and I'm going to show you why in just a second. I don't think it is leans Democrat. I think the state is certainly a toss-up. And if we look at how the state voted last time, only 1.5% in the advantage of Hillary Clinton. But keep in mind, Donald Trump put little to no effort into the state at all. I don't really think there were any rallies held in Minnesota after the primary. There may have been some, but there was no campaign, ground game, or anything like that in Minnesota. It wasn't really on the list of states that needed to be won. But this time around, Trump is actually actively trying to target the state of Minnesota, and in doing so, hoping to expand his electoral map. But if we look at the change from 2012, nearly the entire state, minus the Minneapolis metro area, trended very much more Republican, I guess. Again, if we look at the full results, most of the state is pretty red. The only areas that are much bluer are Ramsey County, which is where St. Paul is, and Hennepin County, which is Minneapolis, and of course this Duluth area and this northern place up here. So ultimately, a very, very close result. If we look at the exit polls, and this is what I think is interesting for the state of Minnesota, men 49 to 43 for Trump, 50 to 43 for females in Hillary's advantage. If we go to race, for some reason they have no racial data at all, but Trump only won the white vote by 7 points. I think that's going to increase. I think Trump's actually going to do better among Minnesota's white population, especially with the current unrest. And you could say, oh, well, that's not true. It actually hurt him. But, I mean, if we look at past elections like 68, civil unrest tends to favor the more law and order candidate, even if Trump hasn't really doubled down on it as much as his base would have liked to. But anyway, the electorate is 87% white here in Minnesota, 13% non-white. The white vote, again, only 7 points in favor of Donald Trump. If we look at white men, white women, 53-39, 47-46. But what's interesting here, if we look at party ID, is Trump also won the independent vote. And also, you can see that 10% of Democrats actually voted for Trump. Only 7% of Republicans voted for Hillary Clinton. Democrats still make up the largest voting share of the Minnesota population, but only by 2 percentage points. Independents, the smallest share. However, Donald Trump actually was able to win independents by around 2 points. If we look at ideology, Trump actually, again, had a little bit of a problem with conservatives. He could have done better here. 11% of conservatives voting for Hillary Clinton. But nonetheless, it was a very, very, very close race. And ultimately, that's why I think it's worthy of being a toss-up. Again, there's not a lot of polling in Minnesota. I think that's rather odd considering the margin was so close back in 2016. But anyway, we're going to move down to Iowa. Not going to talk too much about Iowa. Iowa is likely or lean Republican. I tend to think it's more of likely, especially with the margins being in Trump's favor in the polling. Out of all the polls, Biden has not been ahead in an Iowa poll since mid to late March. So other than that, Trump has a commanding lead over Biden in the state. If we look at the 2016 election briefly, this is a state that took a massive swing away from the Democratic Party. Only 2 counties trended more Democratic. If I was Joe Biden, I really wouldn't put much effort into the state of Iowa because this is a state that's going to be going to Trump, I predict, by a pretty comfortable margin, probably a likely margin like last time. If we look at the full results, nearly all of rural Iowa trended more Republican, and that's bared out here in these counties. The only areas that stayed somewhat solidly Democratic, but again, areas like Lynn County and Polk County, these are counties that are usually much bluer in other presidential races, so that really goes to show the lack of favor. But again, you could say that was a one-off, and also due to the Gary Johnson presence. But again, I think we're going to see Trump probably win Iowa by a likely margin. But again, the polls still have him up, so I'll have the map at the end, which has all the polling aggregates, which will bear that out. If we look at the exit polls out of Iowa, a very, very stark difference here. Males voting 61 to 33% for Donald Trump. Females 51 to 44 in the advantage of Hillary Clinton. So a massive disconnect between the genders there. Donald Trump won by all age groups fairly comfortably. Funny enough, the age group he actually did the worst with was 65 and older. That's pretty surprising. Of course, we go to the more aged 50 to 52. So in all honesty, it's fairly close. The white vote 54 to 40% for Donald Trump, but in a state that's around 90% white and 90% of the electorate's white, that's around the result you'd expect. Latino voters, a little bit more liberal than the national average, 63 for Hillary, 26 for Trump. And if we go to party ID, Republicans make up the largest party ID. No, independents make up the largest party ID, and going overwhelmingly to Trump, swinging the state in his favor. And conservatives make up the largest ideological group in the state, 84% of which voted for Trump. So that's the state of the race in Iowa. We can move down to Wisconsin, or out to Wisconsin. The aggregate here is pretty favorable for Joe Biden right now, 6.3% for Biden in the advantage, plus 4% in the Real Clear Politics average. Change Research poll, and Change Research tends to be a pretty good polling source. 48% for Biden, 44% for Trump. Certainly not good news for Trump, because before coronavirus, we could see that Donald Trump was actually leading in some polls. In the Change Research poll, too, he was leading by around 4 points, and he was tied. And then when coronavirus starts to kick off, the Trump campaign starts to become less popular here. But ultimately, this is a state that's probably going to favor Democrats in the polling either way. Doesn't mean the state is going to go to Democrats, but it certainly could. If we look back at 2016, Wisconsin was another state that trended heavily to the Republicans, particularly in the rural counties, which is probably what handed Donald Trump the victory here. Some of these suburban traditional Republican counties actually got less Republican than they were in 2012, but they were offset by the massive margins Donald Trump was winning some of these rural counties by. But again, if we go to Wisconsin's exit polls, again, Wisconsin's not really a conservative state. It's essentially a purple state. This is not a state that's too contested, usually, but in 2016 has become such on the presidential. If we look at the male vote, plus 14 for Trump, female vote plus 10 for Hillary Clinton. The age groups are kind of all over the place. Donald Trump actually won among 18 to 24-year-olds, 45 to 43. That's the first time I've seen that in an exit poll. That's really interesting. And of course, the group he actually did the worst with was 30 to 39-year-olds at 57-36. I'm going to guess those folks were much more educated, I'm guessing, and probably higher income. Race, 86% of the electorate is white, and Trump won the white vote by 9 points here in Wisconsin. Non-white vote, 76-21 for Hillary. If we go down to party ID, Democrats actually make up the largest group of voters, 91% of which voting for Hillary, 7% for Trump. But what's interesting here is that independents went to Donald Trump by 10 points, and that's probably what ultimately handed him the state. If we look at the state of Michigan, this is a state that the polling has not been very kind to Donald Trump. The polling aggregates have Biden up by 6.2 and 7.3, and the latest Change Research poll, however, does tend to conflict with the aggregate, 47 to 45, which indicates a much closer race than we're being led to believe in Michigan, which I think is fair. I do think Michigan would be the bluest of the Rust Belt states, whether it goes to Trump or Biden. If it goes to Trump, I mean, it would go to Trump by the least amount, like it did in 2016. And looking at 2016, again, Michigan was the state that Donald Trump won by 0.3 percentage points. If we go to trends, basically almost all of the state, minus several counties, looks like 4 counties there, trended toward Donald Trump. Even Wayne County with Detroit trended more Republican. Republicans actually gained votes. Democrats lost votes. That's a bad sign for Joe Biden. However, Michigan is far from a leans red state. This is certainly a purple state, if not a lean blue state by default, and Trump's going to have to work extra hard to try to win this state. If we go to the exit polls, these are probably going to be all over the place because the result was just so close in Michigan. Males, 53-41 for Donald Trump. Females, 53 to 42. Among age groups, Donald Trump did win all the age groups above 18 to 29, but 18 to 29, Hillary Clinton seemed to have dominated that age group, 57 to 34. Trump does the best among 45 to 64 with 52 to 44. And again, the age brackets kind of bear this out. Trump doing worse with younger voters, doing better with older voters. Donald Trump won the white vote by a significant amount, 57 to 36, with the white vote making up around 75% of the population. That's around the population that they make up in the state at large, so that's about pretty proportional. And of course, non-white voters, 80 to 17%. Latino voters, interestingly enough, in Michigan, are actually much more conservative than even the ones in Texas, according to this exit poll. 59% for Hillary, 38% for Trump. That is very surprising. If we go down to ideology here, Democrats make up the overwhelming majority of registered voters, 88% voting for Clinton, 9% for Trump. However, Trump's dominance among independents and Republicans is probably what gave him the state very, very narrowly the last time around. If we look at Ohio real quick, we're not going to spend too much time on Ohio. Joe Biden's actually up in the polls in Ohio, which is very interesting. But keep in mind that the latest poll is a Fox News poll that has Joe Biden up by just 2 points. And most polling agencies do have this as either leans Republican or likely. For now, I would put Ohio as lean Republican. But again, we look at all the aggregates, we'll see where the state really would be if the polls were actually the real results. But anyway, Ohio's another state that trended much more Republican, having voted Democrat twice in a row for Obama. If we look at the trends here, nearly all of Ohio, minus the Columbus area and the Cincinnati area, all trended more Republican. And of course, the exit polls will bear out something interesting as well. Whoops. So, with among males, Donald Trump won that voting block by 23 points. Hillary Clinton only won females by 3. We go to age. Donald Trump won 18 to 44-year-olds by 2 points. 45 and older by 15 points. But if we go more specifically, Donald Trump does the worst among 18 to 29-year-olds, losing that electorate by 9 points, but doing better in all of the other electorates. If we go to race, 80% of the Ohio electorate is white. 62% of the white vote going to Trump, 33% for Hillary. That's definitely what handed him the state. Among white men, 68% for Trump, 27% for Hillary. That's interesting. If we go to party ID, the largest group of voters here is Republicans, 90% voting for Trump, 7% for Hillary. But, of course, the win among independents and the 12% of Democrats that voted for Trump was probably what put this state over the top and gave Trump such a large lead in it overall. The next state we're going to look at is New Hampshire. We'll go down. Actually, we'll go up to Maine in a second. Take a brief look at that. But New Hampshire is interesting because the results are kind of a little out there. We have leans Democrat, tilt, and toss-up. I personally think New Hampshire will be a toss-up as we get closer to the election. But right now, the last 3 polls have Donald Trump up in the state. But again, these polls are from February, so take them with a grain of salt. But, Biden has consistently led here in the polls, but some of the polls being a lot closer than others. The latest poll, 50 Biden, 42 Trump. Again, I don't really know how accurate this polling source really is. If we go to the election results, last time around, the trends, every single county in New Hampshire trended more Republican. And keep in mind, Donald Trump only lost this state by less than around 2,000 votes, So this was a super, super, super close state and was the closest state in the country by raw vote total. Again, if we look at the exit polls in New Hampshire, among male voters, Donald Trump wins by 13 points. If we go by race, 92% of the electorate is white. That's around the same percentage of the state at large, so it's pretty accurate. 48% going to Trump, 46% for Hillary Clinton. Non-whites, 58-33. If we go to party ID, independents make up the largest share of the electorate, and the independents are tied, which is almost what we saw in the overall results. However, slightly more Republicans voted for Hillary than Democrats for Trump, and that could have been what swung the state. The largest ideology is moderates, and Hillary won that group by around 9 points. 9% of liberals voted for Trump, which was interesting, and 9% of conservatives voted for Hillary Clinton, 86% for Trump. So ultimately, this is a state that's going to be a toss-up in my opinion. Maine, look at the polling aggregate. Biden's doing fairly well in the state of Maine, leading by around 10 points here. There's no aggregate here, but he's doing fairly well in the state. Lean, likely, toss-up. I would tend to say that the state of Maine will probably be lean Democrat when it's said and done, but right now the polling indicates it's going to be likely, if not safe. But Niskanen, again, always likes to stretch it in favor of Democrats, so I don't really take it that seriously. And Maine is another state that every single county trended more Republican, and this was the closest margin in Maine's history since 1996, I believe. Maybe even 1998 or 1988. But this is one of the closest margins that Maine has seen in a very, very long time, especially in a presidential race. The last time in 2012, Barack Obama, I believe, got 56% of the vote out of Maine. Mitt Romney only got 40% or something like that. And if we go to the Maine exit polls, we can really take a look at that. So among males, Trump dominates, 9-point lead, 11-point lead. If we go to race, Hillary Clinton won the white vote by 1 point. White people making up 93% of the electorate. Not really a shock in the state of Maine. If we go to party ID, independents make up the largest group, but Hillary Clinton was actually able to win over independents 46-41, which is probably the reason she won the state. And of course, among moderates, Hillary Clinton won that group by a point. Trump won conservatives 84-11, Hillary 84-8. So more Republicans voted for Trump than Democrats. More Republicans voted for Hillary than Democrats Trump. So overall, very interesting results out of the state of Maine. But this still kind of indicates to me that the state is going to be somewhat close, but, it remains to be seen. Pennsylvania is a state that's going to be very, very close. I would rank this as a toss-up. The aggregate has Biden up 2.5 and 3.3 respectively, and the latest Change Research poll, where there are actually two of them, the last two one had Trump up by 4 and another had Biden up by 3. So what that tells me is basically Pennsylvania is basically in a dead heat right now. And I think if the election were held today, we would see something similar, a very, very close margin. If we look at the Pennsylvania results out of 2016, and we look at the change, nearly every county, minus the Philadelphia suburbs and a few of these random counties out here, trended more Republican overall, and that's probably what swung the state. I believe the margin last time was 51-46 for Obama and Romney. Now it was 48.2 to 47.5, a 0.7% advantage for Donald Trump carrying the state. If we look at the exit polls out of Pennsylvania, the male voters plus 17 for Trump, female voters plus 13 for Hillary Clinton. Among age groups, Hillary Clinton does fairly well among 30 to 44-year-olds, 18 to 29-year-olds, but then as you get much older, you have the more pro-Trump vote there. 81% of the Pennsylvania electorate is white, and Trump won the white vote by 16 points. If we go down to party ID, Democrats make up the largest party ID, with 11% of Democrats voting for Trump. That probably had a lot to do with why the state actually flipped this time around. 9% of Republicans voted for Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump won the independents by 7 points. And here among ideology, moderate is the largest ideology. Hillary wins that by 10, but Trump wins conservatives very handedly. So overall, the state of Pennsylvania being in a dead heat is not new, at least from 2016. But again, looking at these polls, the polls are all over the place. Biden seems to have a slight edge in the overall polls. When you look at all of them, there's more polls with Biden ahead than Trump. But this is definitely a state that could ultimately decide the race and needs to be watched come election night. Next state we're going to look at is Virginia. We're not going to spend too much time here in Virginia. The polls are very, very good for Joe Biden. The average has him up by 12 and 270 to win, and 9 points by the RCP average. So we don't really need to spend much time on Virginia. If we look at the 2016 results, Virginia trended all over the place. Rural areas trending more Republican, urban and suburban areas trending more Democrat, giving us the result of Hillary Clinton winning the state by 5.4 percentage points, a fairly comfortable margin for a Democrat winning this state. I would probably rank the state of Virginia as of today as a likely Democratic state. Not safe yet, but my prediction is that Joe Biden will win the state by around 7 points. If we look at the exit polls here in Virginia, Trump only won the male vote by 9 points. Hillary won the female vote by a safe margin there. Among age groups, of course, 18 to 29-year-olds were the most Democratic, 54 to 36, 30 to 44-year-olds, 53-40, and of course the oldest, 52-45 for Republicans. By race, 67% of the electorate was white, 59% to 35%, so fairly conservative, but actually the white demographic in Ohio was more conservative, and if we look at North Carolina, which has very similar demographics to Virginia, you're also going to see that the white vote was more conservative there. One of the reasons why it probably went to Trump and not Hillary Clinton. Among party ID, Democrats make up the most in terms of plurality here. 92% of Democrats are voting for Hillary Clinton, 6% for Trump. 6% of Republicans voting for Hillary, 88% voting for Trump. So third parties definitely hurt Trump here more than they hurt Hillary Clinton. But Trump also won independents by 5 points. Yet that was not enough. If we look at ideology, the largest ideology in Virginia is moderate, 58% to 36% for Hillary Clinton, conservative, 83 to 12% for Trump, and liberal, 85, 11%. So Virginia's a state I wouldn't pay that much attention to. If I was Donald Trump, I really wouldn't put a lot of money, time, or resources in the state because it doesn't seem that winnable. Likewise with Joe Biden, as he'll probably carry the state pretty comfortably come election day. North Carolina, take a quick look at North Carolina here. Every polling agency has North Carolina as a toss-up, which I think is a fair assessment for the state. 270 to win has Biden up by 0.8, whereas Real Clear Politics has Trump up by 0.3. The latest Change Research poll has Biden up by just 2 points, which is bad news for Biden, and I'll explain why. Because Change Research polls, well, not Change Research, but polls in general in North Carolina tend to favor the Democrat, sometimes by a margin of up to 5 points in the actual results. So Biden only being up by around 2 to 3 points in the latest polls out of North Carolina is not really good news for him. Also, we have polls where Trump is also leading, but overall, Biden has more of a lead in the state. But you'll remember, Hillary Clinton's aggregate in North Carolina on the election night in 2016 was 2 points. The aggregate now for Biden is actually worse than that. If we look at the North Carolina results, again, this is a pretty decisive victory, 49.8 to 46.2. If we look at the trends, Raleigh, Greensboro, Charlotte trended more Democrat, Fayetteville trended more Republican, and most of rural North Carolina trended much more Republican. If we look at the exit polls, now again, notice the similarity in demographics to Virginia. There's only slightly more of the white vote here in North Carolina, but the white vote is much more conservative than it was in Virginia, 63% to 32% for Donald Trump. Non-white vote 79 and 18%. If we look at party ID, ideology, party ID, 8% of Democrats voted for Trump, just 4% of Republicans voted for Hillary Clinton, and independents were won overwhelmingly by Donald Trump, despite Democrats making up the largest vote share in the state. Ideology, conservatives the dominant ideology. 83% of conservatives voted for Trump, 15% for Hillary Clinton. 57% of moderates, which is interesting because that's similar margin to what we saw in Virginia. However, unlike Virginia, North Carolina has a majority or a plurality conservative population, whereas Virginia has a plurality moderate population. But anyway, it looks like North Carolina is going to be very close in terms of the polling. I think as we get closer to Election Day, we'll see that Trump does better in the polling in North Carolina, and the overall results are probably going to be similar as to what they were in 2016. It's not a state I would think Biden needs to pay too much attention to because, quite frankly, he doesn't need it to win. There's plenty of other states that he could focus on. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, New Hampshire maybe. You know, campaigning in states like Arizona, North Carolina, Texas, and Georgia are a bit of a stretch because there's no guarantee you're going to win them. If anything, you could just be putting resources into a state you know you can't win. And I know long-term those states are trending more Democrat, but again, trends can be bucked, and also this is a very unique election year, and 2020 is a very unique year. So overall, a lot of stuff to look out for. All right, so we're going to look at 2 more states now. We're going to look at Georgia. Polling aggregate for Trump is very favorable in Georgia, 7.5 percentage points. Pretty large. Again, though this sample is very outdated, the most recent polls show a much closer race. However, it's still not that close. A lot of polls have Trump and Biden tied, but most polls give Trump the advantage, especially more recent ones, and ones during coronavirus, funny enough, and somewhat before it. But ultimately, Georgia, if we look at the trends down here, went to Trump by 5.1 percentage points. Again, if we look at trends, the Atlanta metro area trended much more Democratic. Rural Georgia trended more blue. Rural Georgia trended more red. And the urban centers like Savannah, Macon, and Athens. Well, Athens is a college town, but they trended more Democratic as well. If we look at the exit polls out of Georgia, this is a state that's much less white than the other states, but if we look at males, 60% for Trump, 37% for Hillary. Females, Hillary Clinton wins the female vote by just 9 points, 11 points. If we scroll down to age, young voters in Georgia vote overwhelmingly Democrat, 65 to 29, 25 to 29-year-olds, 60 to 37, 30 to 39-year-olds, 50 to 44. It's only when you get into this older age bracket, in particular 65 and older, where you have Trump winning overwhelmingly in the state of Georgia. So it does look like the future is a lot more liberal than the older generations. The white vote only makes up 60% of Georgia, 75% of which voting for Trump, just 21% for Hillary. Non-white vote, 83% for Hillary, 14% for Trump. If we look at party ID, Republicans still make up the plurality of registered voters, at least in these exit polls, and Trump wins them 94 to 4. Hillary Clinton wins Democrats 94 to 5, 5% going to Trump, 1% going to Gary Johnson. Independents going to Trump by 11 points. So ultimately fairly good there. The largest ideology in Georgia is conservative, 85% of which voted for Trump, 15% for Hillary. Moderates and liberals making up a much smaller share. But anyway, that's the state of the race in Georgia. The last state we're going to look at is Florida. The rest of the states aren't really that contested or really need much paying attention to. So all the rankings have Florida as a toss-up. I think toss-up is the fairest way to rank the state. Sabato's crystal ball has this as a lean Republican race. In the aggregate, Biden is leading by 2.8 and 3.4. The latest Change.Research poll, which is very interesting, has Biden up by 7, which is very bad news for Donald Trump, considering that before coronavirus, he was around tied or only just down 1 or 2 points in the state of Florida overall. This is a state I definitely think is going to be very close, as it always is. That's not really a surprise for Florida. If we go to the 2016 election results, Donald Trump won the state by 1.2 percentage points, and the trends are all over the place, with some urban areas down here trending more Republican, whereas places like Tampa, but other urban areas like Jacksonville, Orlando, Tallahassee trending more Democratic. But overall, the state trended more Republican, giving it to Donald Trump. The last thing we're going to look at in this video is the exit polls coming out of Florida in the 2016 election. Among male voters, Donald Trump has a 9-point lead. Among female voters, Hillary Clinton had a 4-point lead. But basically, what's important here, again, the white vote, 64 to 32 for Trump. Trump cannot do any worse among the white vote in Florida, or he'd have to make it up with doing better with the minority voting blocks, or else he will lose the state in 2020. Among Cubans, and this is interesting that they have this here, 54% of Cubans voted for Trump, just 41% for Hillary, but other Latinos, however, are much more liberal, 71% for Clinton, 26% for Trump, and then non-Latinos voted 51-45% for Trump. If we go down to party ID, if we can find it, this is one of the longer exit polls. Somewhere down here. Yeah, this exit poll is kind of like, this is a much longer exit poll than the other states, which is why it's kind of annoying to have to find this. So party ID, we have Democrats with 90.8%, 90% to 8%, sorry. 8% of Democrats voting for Trump, 8% of Republicans voting for Hillary Clinton. Independents make up the plurality, although it's very, very close, and hence why Florida as a whole is a very close state. Trump won independents by around 4 points, which is probably what gave him the state at the end of the day. Republicans make up a 1-point share larger of the vote than Democrats do, but Democrats still make up around a third of the electorate here in Florida. But anyway, that's the state of the race now. If I had to look at the state of Florida and guess if it were to vote, whether it be red or blue today, it looks like narrowly it would go blue. That's if the election was today. The final map I made of the aggregates here are not just of the Wikipedia polls, but all the polls that I've looked at. If the race were held today, we would see Biden winning by 319 electoral votes to Trump's 219. New Hampshire being tilt Democrat. Yeah, it was tilt Democrat. It's such a gray color, it's hard to tell. But basically, this is what the race would look like. Texas going to Trump by a lean margin. Georgia going to Trump by a lean margin. Florida going to Biden by a lean margin. North Carolina to Trump by a lean margin. Ohio and Iowa going to Trump by much closer margins than they did in 2016, and of course the Southwest being much bluer than it was last time. But again, this is just based on the polls and not my prediction of the race. But if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. Be sure to leave a thumbs up and comment down below your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.